The AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. The book on Donald Trump is already out. Author Gene Stone has written the Trump Survival Guide, advice for living through what we never thought would happen. Anti-Trump activist Jeff Hauser says Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III is the most appalling cabinet selection in history. And Bill Press talks about Trump's policy toward Israel with Michael Wilner of the Jerusalem Post. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Everybody has to do something, says author Gene Stone, who has written the Trump Survival Guide, everything you need to know about living through what you hoped would never happen. And we say hello to Gene Stone, who's been a book, magazine, and newspaper editor. He's the author of more than 40 books, including The Trump Survival Guide, everything you need to know about living through what you hoped would never happen. Gene Stone, thank you so much for joining us today on AmericasDemocrats.org.
No, thank you for having me.
You're quite welcome. And, you know, I've got to say, this book was published, 10 days after the inauguration of Trump. How did you get it out so fast, or perhaps it wrote itself?
Well, actually, 10 days before the inauguration of Trump. We wanted the book to come out before the inauguration because we really felt that there was going to be a need for some kind of guide that would help people even before he became president, because, as you know, the worry and the despair and the dejection set in on election eve. As to writing the book, one of the points I'm trying to make in this book is that everybody who feels strongly that they have to oppose the Trump administration has to do something. Everybody has some kind of talent, some kind of skill, something that they can do. Mine happens to be I can write really quickly. So basically, my publisher said, "Can you write a book in 12 days?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I can," and I did.
That's funny, and I appreciate the correction there. You wrote this 10 days, or published it 10 days before the inauguration of Trump. What are the top issues that progressives and Democrats can use to turn the tide by 2018 and 2020?
Well, there are a lot of issues, but there's no question that the first issue is his health care. If the Republicans succeed in dismantling Obamacare, which they seem to think they can do, more than 20 million Americans are probably going to be without health insurance. And as far as we know, the GOP doesn't seem to have any kind of replacement plan. And in fact, it's looking more and more as if the Republicans really don't have any coherent strategy. And I think the reason is that they're hearing from their constituents people who are saying, look, you just can't take away my health care and not have something to replace it. Just saying no to everything works if you're a Tea Party member and you have no constituency. But if you're a member of Congress and you're just saying no, your voters are going to be quite upset about it. And losing their health care is not an easy thing. So I think health care is probably the top issue. And if I had to put a second issue, it would be national security. I think it seemed pretty clear that Russia was actively trying to influence our election. And we don't even know what Trump's relationship with Putin is. It's vague, but it's probably going to be a liability. And we're also seeing that Trump seems to be neglecting his intelligence briefings. And the fact that he doesn't seem to take these intelligence briefings very seriously would kind of highlight his lack of interest in our country's security. I don't think anybody in our country wants to feel that our president shouldn't care about our security. And it's not just Trump, by the way. His family seems to have very complicated web of conflicts of interest with other countries, whether you're talking about Russia or China, as well as his cabinet picks, some of whom seem to have been dealing with countries that have sanctions imposed on them. So if I were going to nominate the two most prominent issues, I would say healthcare and national security.
On local action, even if that means different priorities in different regions?
That's a really good question, and I don't know the answer. I think that Democrats have to focus more on statewide races, though. The Republicans did it so successfully in 2010, and subsequently they were very able to gerrymander congressional districts in order to protect their House majority. So I really do think that local politics matter, really all the way down to, let's say, even local school boards. And I also think Democrats fight hard in southern and rural places, which they seem to be neglecting. And I think that's one reason that Trump won, because so much of that part of the country voted so strongly for Trump. But I do think that one of the issues is if you're going to do that kind of a 50-state focus, you still have to remain faithful to your values. It looks as if the younger voters who are tilting Democratic have somewhat more progressive values than the southern and rural voters. And so I think you have this contradiction that is important to keep in mind. You want to appeal to the whole country, but you don't want to lose your core voters. So it's complicated, and I think that's one of the reasons that the Democrats are having internal arguments about what do they do. Do they have a 50-state policy or not? And I don't think there is an absolute answer.
We're speaking with Gene Stone, book, magazine, newspaper editor, and author of many books, including The Trump Survival Guide, Everything You Need to Know About Living Through What You Hoped Would Never Happen. Gene, aren't all these prescriptions the same things that the Tea Party did to seize power in 2010 and thereafter?
Well, the Tea Party was really interesting because basically their platform was no. It was just simply saying no. Just say no to everything. And they were of like minds. They really all believed they had to block everything Obama did. Whether we like it or not, the left is of many minds. You probably remember Will Rogers' famous quote, this back from the 1920s, and it's still true today, when he said, "I'm not a member of any organized political party. I'm a Democrat." Mm-hmm. So we do run into this problem of Democrats on the left tend to not speak with the same mind about everything. And by the way, that's why I divided the book into issues instead of one coherent policy, because I think that's where the left can work. But concentrating on the specific issues they care about, and that makes it more inclusive, because it isn't just Democrats who care about some of these issues, but I know Republicans who feel very strongly about education, or they feel very strongly about gay rights, or most importantly, I actually know Republicans who really care about the environment. So I don't think we can emulate the Tea Party. I don't think the Democrats will ever be a successful party of no to everything, but I do think that they can be no on the specific issues they really care about.
So Trump opponents should be focusing on the few doable items instead of fighting on all fronts.
Yeah, that's what I think. I think that if you decide you're going to fight everything, you risk succeeding at almost nothing. So what I'd like to think is that the Democrats and the people who follow them, they're going to figure out intelligently and with insight which policies they really can do something about. I do think that the Republicans are facing a lot of problems repealing most of Obamacare. But I think the Democrats can win this one by highlighting how badly off people are going to be if it's replaced. But I don't think that, for instance, they can go after every single thing that Trump and the Republicans want to do. It's really a matter of just picking the issues. And again, it goes back to what issues do you really care about? What are you going to do then to try to guarantee those issues remain constant to your value system?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would think, especially heading into the midterms, if you can just show a little bit of positive action towards even one major issue. Healthcare would probably be the easiest one, since there's no way they're going to be able to repeal it the way he's talked about. I would think that would do very well for the Democrats heading into 2018.
Exactly. And I think that the more the Democrats align themselves with positivity on issues, this is what we can accomplish. This is what we can do. Look at our track record. These are the things we can do for the American public, and particularly if the administration looks as it's been taking away some rights, taking away values, taking away health care. If we can come back and say, no, these are the things we can do to bring these things back because people want them, it'll put us in a strong position.
Absolutely. Now, while the Democratic leaders in Congress will, of course, try to come up with ways to stop the Trump initiatives, what do you think about the idea for individuals and interest groups to take to the streets as they did in the 60s?
Well, you know, the 60s were, 50-something years ago. The society has moved on. The great thing about the streets is that the streets are now the internet, and the streets are now social media, and the streets are now email. So I don't know that you necessarily have to go out and show people on cameras, which they had to do in the 1960s because there's no other way to have any kind of visibility. But the worst thing we can do is remain silent. And that's the thing that my book really stresses, is you cannot remain silent. If you feel as strongly about these issues as I do and most other people do who didn't vote for Trump, you have to do something. But it doesn't mean being in the streets. You can donate to an organization. You can join one. You can sign a petition. You can go on your Trump-supporting uncle's Facebook wall and say something. So you want to find a way so that our voices can be like a chorus of dissent and make that heard through all the new ways that people can be heard in 2017.
Gene Stone, book, magazine, newspaper editor, author of many books, including The Trump Survival Guide, everything you need to know about living through what you hoped would never happen, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Gene, thank you so much for your time with us. We do look forward to having you back again with us soon.
Well, thank you very much.
You're quite welcome, and this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
This Social Security measure, I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America, whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Jeff Hauser of the Revolving Door Project calls Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III the most appalling cabinet selection in American history, and we'll talk to him about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
When you think of America's great constitutional originators, names like Jefferson, Washington, and Franklin come to mind. And of course, Abbott. Last January, Texas Governor Greg Abbott revealed that he has penned 9 new amendments to the U.S. Constitution. Abbott is proposing a bill of sale, effectively transferring our national government from the people to the plutocrats. His tweaks would outlaw government actions that restrain corporate abuse of workers and consumers, while also preventing future Congresses from meeting crucial public needs such as health care, voter rights, and restoration of our national infrastructure. However, Abbott is not the force behind this tampering with our Constitution. The American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, at the direction of the Koch brothers and their corporate cohorts, wrote Abbott's bill of sale. Back in 2010, ALEC's board of directors approved a resolution calling for a constitutional convention to enact the corporate humbuggery Abbott is now pushing. Convening this convention is a dream of those seeking an American Kokistan, and ALEC is spearheading a hodgepodge of right-wing groups that are close to succeeding. At the convention, they would attempt to rewrite our nation's fundamental governing document. The changes would enthrone the moneyed corporations that Jefferson and other founders abhorred as destroyers of America's democratic possibilities. It takes 34 states to convene a constitutional convention, and 28 states have already passed resolutions to do exactly that. The ALEC-Koch consortium is now targeting 11 others. This is Jim Hightower saying, absurd? Of course. Even the former head of the right-wing Eagle Forum, Phyllis Schlafly, calls this push, quote, a prescription for political chaos. To keep up with ALEC, go to alecexposed.org.
If you'd like more of Jim Hightower's real populism, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter gives you the real lowdown on which corporations, by name, are doing what to the middle class, our environment, and our democracy. Each month, the Hightower Lowdown brings you facts you didn't know, along with actions you can take to fight back. It also comes with a sense of humor. Hightower believes we can fight the gods and still have fun. Plus, get this, it's cheap. Only $15 brings you 12 issues a year. For real populism, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Jeff Hauser, a leader in the opposition to Trump's cabinet appointees, says the new president thinks his Electoral College victory gives him a mandate for hiring the most unqualified people to run the government. And we say hello to Jeff Hauser, who runs the Revolving Door Project, which is an effort to increase scrutiny on executive branch appointments and ensure that political appointees are focused on serving the public interest rather than personal professional advancement. Jeff, thank you very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure to have you with us. In your opinion, are the Trump cabinet appointments the most conservative ever and at the same time perhaps the least qualified ever?
I think they are certainly the least qualified ever. I think that they kind of run the gamut in terms of their backgrounds. I think there are some enormously problematic ideologies that some of them have espoused, like Jeff Sessions, who is certainly nominally qualified in the sense of having experience but lacking kind of a moral compass. On the other hand, you have people like Ben Carson and Steve Mnuchin who have no obvious relevant experience for the jobs that they are being handed over to. And in the case of Mnuchin, he has kind of a terrible private sector record, but no public sector record. So it's kind of hard to argue that he's the most conservative. I unfortunately fear he might become one of the most corrupt. So they kind of run the gamut on ideology, but very few of them have the sort of credentials that you even saw in, say, a Bush cabinet.
Well, let's do a little rating here. Who would you say are the worst of them?
I think Jeff Sessions is the most appalling cabinet selection I can ever recall in American history. I think that it is such a poke in the eye of anyone who's in the group that's ever been victimized by racism or bigotry or sexism to put up to be our chief law enforcement officer, someone who has so little respect for people of color, religious minorities, women, LGBTQ, you name it. Jeff Sessions is opposed to anyone who's basically not a straight white man having power. And he's also comes out of a pretty corrupt political heritage in Alabama. Put aside issues of bigotry, the Alabama Republican Party, in which that he was a leading figure, employed some of the sharpest elbows and most questionable tactics in his rise to power and in their rise to dominance of the state of Alabama. And I think that people have given a little bit too little attention to the fact that he has serious ethical problems above and beyond his repulsive ideology. I also think Steve Mnuchin at Treasury is terribly unqualified and very worrisome, and that Michael Flynn at the National Security Agency is extremely worrisome, and the only thing that really kind of saves him is that there is no Senate vote, and so he's not capable of being put under the same scrutiny that the others are.
Mm-hmm. Now, Does it really matter who it is who executes the policy and directions of the chief executive? I mean, maybe they'll all quit in a year when they find out they have no power.
I think they actually will have a lot of power. Even the most skilled White House, filled with the most experienced Washington operatives, find it very challenging to manage the breadth of the federal government's enforcement authorities and rule writing capabilities. But I think if you look at the nature of the people who are being hired in the Trump White House, Reince Priebus, Steve Bannon, Jared Kushner, these are people who have no relevant experience. And I think they're going to find running the country to be incredibly overwhelming. And so I think that the cabinet agencies and the regulators who are appointed by Trump and ultimately confirmed by the Senate are going to have enormous ability to shape public policy, law enforcement, regulatory decisions with very little oversight.
We're speaking with Jeff Hauser, who runs the Revolving Door Project, which, again, is an effort to increase scrutiny on executive branch appointments and ensure that political appointees are focused on serving the public interest rather than personal professional advancement. Are any of his appointees at least reasonable in the eyes of progressives? Say James Mattis at Defense, Nikki Haley at the United Nations?
I think that Mattis has a lot of smart people saying very, very positive things about him as a patriot and as a military thinker. I think that there are aspects of Mattis's record, his positions, and what he has done since he left the military that are worrisome. But I think that he also brings very strong positive credentials to the Defense Department. And some people have some qualms about the idea of a former general running the Defense Department, and it will require a waiver from the Senate, and they should definitely dot their I's and cross their T's before allowing him to become Secretary of Defense. That requires a specific additional measure. But I think that Mattis is a credentialed, smart person. I think Nikki Haley is, not my ideology, but brings a lot of strong managerial skills. It's not clear to me what exactly makes Nikki Haley qualified to work in foreign policy. My understanding is she has no foreign policy experience, but she's a credible person. She's smart, and I would have much rather seen her, say, be Attorney General, because I think, Haley did show some leadership in opposing the Confederate flag in South Carolina.
Well, it's interesting the different people that he has chosen for or appointed for these different cabinet positions, and most of them don't seem qualified for the positions that they've been chosen.
Yeah, he definitely believes that he has, because he himself has no public policy experience or any real evident knowledge of public policy, he thinks that somehow or another his Electoral College majority creates a mandate of sorts for unqualified people to run the federal government, and that is very much the opposite viewpoint that I would take. I would say that part of the reason why Donald Trump got a lower percentage of the popular vote than Mitt Romney did is that he has no evident qualifications, and poll after poll showed that people thought that Hillary Clinton was better qualified and better credentialed to be president. Obviously, many people in key states voted for Trump over Clinton for a variety of reasons, but he is trying to act on the notion that one doesn't need experience. I think a lot of people thought he was going to hire the best people, which would include people who had knowledge of the relevant issues. He literally chose in Rick Perry someone who doesn't remember that the Energy Department exists when he's in public debates and is now being asked to run it. I think that the public is going to be very disappointed as they get the bigger picture on this appointments and how little qualifications they bring to the table.
And Rick Perry also wanted to abolish it. Had he remembered what he wanted to do,
yeah.
He wanted to abolish it. So I mean, it doesn't.
Yeah, and that's a recurring theme. There's a recurring theme of appointments of people who are opposed to the very reason their agency was brought into being. Perry wanted to abolish the Department of Energy. DeVos is opposed to public education. The head of the Environmental Protection Agency does not want to protect the environment. There's kind of the labor secretary wanted to automate all jobs at his fast food restaurants. I mean, a lot of the cabinet selection process seems more designed to troll people who care about good public policy than it is to create good public policy.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've suggested that progressives oppose each and every Trump nominee. Wouldn't that diffuse the opposition and bleed energy and money from the overall effort?
I think that there are two ways one could be in opposition. One is to get in the weeds on each of these specific people, which should happen. But if all opposition was based off of very particularized, granular distinctions in each person's credentials, I think that would diffuse energy. But I think there's some big picture reasons why one should have enormous skepticism of the entire batch of nominees. For one thing, we don't know what Donald Trump's personal financial interests are. Generally, we know what we know, but some of what we know are the names of shell companies that we don't know what they actually own or to whom they owe considerable amounts of money. We don't know Trump's financial interests, and we do not know which appointees represent some sort of side deal by Trump with that party to either make money for the Trump organization or to pay off debts. We don't know why these people are being appointed, and we don't know what conflicts that the Trump family may have with the work of the agency to which they're being appointed. So right off the bat, that creates a basic question of what do we know and when will we know it? And can we make informed decisions on cabinet agencies in this vacuum of relevant information about Donald Trump and his family? And I would argue no. Second, the fact that so many of them are unqualified, that are on paper lack any relevant experience for the position to which they are being appointed, allows one to make a qualifications case that builds energy across people rather than diffuses it. Activists can reference the fact that this is an unqualified cabinet and talk broadly about so many nominees at one time rather than have to get into specific policy disputes with each of them. So I think that's very different. And we also know that Trump did something very unusual in his cabinet selection process. He named people and then began vetting them. In previous transitions, one looked into whether or not there were conflicts of interest and other potential problems with nominees before making the nomination. Trump made nominations first and then started asking vetting questions afterward. So there's no real reason to defer to the notion that these people are clean and have been scrubbed in a background way, the way you normally would be able to make that assumption. So I think that's another reason to oppose this entire process as broken and corrupted.
Who do Democrats have the best chance of defeating? Mnuchin at Treasury, Tillerson at State, Session at Justice, somebody else?
I mean, I think that in different ways, Mnuchin and Tillerson are probably the most defeatable in the sense that Mnuchin lacks any real connection to Senate Republicans. He is not someone who has public policy experience, and he does not have deep relationships among Democrats or Republicans. That puts him at a disadvantage, especially if Senate Republicans are seeking to distance themselves from the Goldman Sachs critique, the notion that the government is being handed over to Goldman Sachs despite all of Trump's rhetoric to the contrary. So I think Mnuchin gives people an interesting opportunity to distance themselves from Trump and hedge against the fact that Trump, who's already not popular, might get much more unpopular in the future. Tillerson raises all these other issues. Tillerson's genuinely close to Vladimir Putin. This is not conjecture. This is, he's an award winner from Putin. And so there's obviously a wing of the Republican Party that has not flip-flopped on Vladimir Putin. And I think that they could oppose Tillerson in conjunction with Democrats who have a variety of other concerns about Tillerson, including Putin, but not limited to that. So I think that I would say those right off the bat. But I also think that the DeVos is a disaster in Michigan, and I think on one hand that makes her extremely vulnerable. On the other hand, she is such a significant Republican donor, she and her family, that she might be insulated from the normal scrutiny you would otherwise imagine she might receive.
Mm-hmm. Well, so much for draining the swamp in that regard.
Exactly.
Yeah, Jeff Hauser runs the Revolving Door Project. Again, this is an effort to increase scrutiny on executive branch appointments and ensure that political appointees are focused on serving the public interest. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We do look forward to having you back again with us soon. Thanks
for having me.
You're quite welcome. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to keep the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, on the air, and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press talks foreign policy with Michael Wilner of the Jerusalem Post.
Headline in the New York Times a week or so ago caught my attention. Is Trump the friend that Israel needs? What can we expect in relations between the United States and Israel, and what direction will they go under President Donald Trump 9 days from now? Michael Wilner is the Washington bureau chief for the Jerusalem Post, who joins us in studio this morning. Michael, good to see you.
Good to see you, Bill.
David Friedman, Donald Trump's nominee to be the ambassador to Israel. Tell us about him and what he stands for and what we can expect.
So David, who I got to know a bit during the campaign, he's a leading bankruptcy lawyer. He's known Trump for many, many years. I believe it's about 20 years. Quote me on that, but he got to know him on a personal level because Trump really, he would show up at Friedman's house, for example, when Friedman's father died, and he was hosting Shiva. Trump would be there. They had a very close relationship, and he became one of two advisors on Israel during the campaign. He also, he became something of a surrogate to the Jewish community as well during the campaign, and he's a practicing Orthodox Jew. He doesn't have experience in foreign policy yet, but he certainly has very strong views on where Israel should be going in the relationship.
Right, and strong views which really contradict what U.S. policy has been toward Israel under Democratic and Republican presidents, correct?
Yeah.
The issue, let's talk about a couple of specific issues. The settlements, for example.
Yeah, he not only supports settlement activity, he has fundraised for the settler enterprise. Look, there are those arguing on both sides that, yes, things are changing in terms of Israel policy, but Israel is in a very different place than it was even 15 years ago, certainly in a different place than when settlements first began in the late 1970s. Now, on the left and in Barack Obama's camp, the argument is, the reality is changing such that it justifies some of our recent actions at the Security Council, Secretary Kerry's statement of late, which outlined that a two-state solution is becoming impossible because of the changes on the ground. And on the other side, you're hearing folks saying, well, there is no partner for peace. The Palestinian Authority is truly a fragile thing and likely to collapse. Hillary Clinton at the Brookings Institution in just about a year ago now said that a collapse would lead to the black flag of ISIS over Ramallah, and who would we talk to then? So there's that on the right, and in David Friedman's camp is simply justification for a re-exploration, if you will, of Israel policy.
But doesn't it affect, let's talk about one other issue, which is Friedman is totally for, again, under Republicans and Democrats. I'm not an expert in the Middle East, but I know
you're absolutely right that has been bipartisan policy.
That's been bipartisan
Absolutely.
policy. I mean, George Bush was against the settlements.
Question. Yeah.
So was Condi Rice. So this is not just a Democratic party.
Right.
But the other issue is on where the embassy is. I mean, geography. In a sense, in Middle East, geography is everything. So,
right.
But moving it from Tel Aviv to Israel to Jerusalem has, again, American policy stays in.
So there's one thing I would say to that.
Friedman, right, wants to move it, and Trump move it right away to Israel.
Correct.
So what's going to happen? I mean, what if they do that, right?
Right.
What can we expect to happen?
So there are two. I would bifurcate this because there has been bipartisan executive policy on where the embassy should be, and it has been in Tel Aviv across Democratic and Republican administrations. Conversely, there's been bipartisan congressional policy since at least 1995, when there was an overwhelming vote for the embassy to be moved. And all of those Republican and Democratic presidents have campaigned to move it. They have subsequently changed their positions while in office. It doesn't seem as if Trump will change his position while in office. What's going to happen? It, of course, depends who you ask, but if you really ask anyone in the region, including friends of ours that are very important, the Jordanians, the Egyptians, parties, the Palestinian Authority, and all moderate factions of the PA, all friends of ours that we want to maintain friendships with, not only that want to work with Israel and want a productive relationship with Israel, they are sounding the alarm bells and saying, not only would this cause a violent uprising in the West Bank, possibly in Jerusalem, but beyond and throughout the region, this would be the sort of spark.
Right.
And Secretary Kerry is, of course, warning of an explosion of violence. Now, there are others who say there is a way to do this, a careful and thought-out way to do this that might mitigate that violence, and the way is quite simple, which is, while Jerusalem as a city obviously is one of the major issues in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, how that would be divided or who would have sovereignty, there's no debate over the status of West Jerusalem. And there are certain areas of the city which under any circumstance, under a two-state solution, would be Israeli. And if the incoming administration were to make clear in a responsible and careful way that what they're doing is they're moving it to a part of the city which under any circumstances the international community would recognize as Israel's capital, that's not what they're doing. What they're saying is this is Israel's undivided and eternal capital, which is Israel's line as well, and that is what the Palestinians have issue with. Okay,
so the idea, to me, that the Trump administration could finesse something as delicately as that and as carefully as that, as diplomatically as that, I find to be almost a contradiction in terms. Isn't the reality here that this is a test for whether we're going to continue to pursue what is certainly an elusive goal in the two-state solution, or just junk it and just say Israel über alles, basically?
Right. I mean, that's the argument that certainly the President and Secretary Kerry have made, which is not only is this endangered, but given the stance of the incoming administration and their perceived lack of regard for a two-state solution in any meaningful way, as in it's no longer in the GOP platform, and what appears to be support for settlement activity, we needed to act in a way that gets the international community on record. What the Israeli government argues is actually quite simple, that settlement activity is not a fundamental obstacle to a two-state solution. That in Secretary Kerry's speech, he did not mention once the fact that there were many settlements in Gaza that ultimately were vacated. You had Jewish graves that were exhumed, and that did not lead to peace. What the Israelis are asking for, that they feel as if they didn't get from the Obama administration, and they're hoping they get from a Trump administration, is a recognition of what those fundamentals are. And they believe that it's a lack of Palestinian recognition of a Jewish, not a state of Israel, but a Jewish state of Israel in any boundary.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Gene Stone, Jeff Hauser, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.